West Michigan Week continues its roundtable discussion with GOP candidates running for U.S. Senate. Grand Rapids' Randy Heckman's campaign hinges on an aggressive plan to balance the budget. That includes cost cutting without raising taxes. We'll discuss on West Michigan Week. And on our panel today, we've got our good friend Doug Copeman, professor of political science at Calvin College. Thank you for joining us. And Dave Murray, MLive Media Group. Thanks for stopping by. And our guest is Randy Heckman, GOP U.S. Senate candidate. How are you, sir?
I'm great. Thank you. Good to be with you.
Writing books, taking care of business. Let's talk a little bit about the bio and your background.
Right. I'm from Grand Rapids originally. Was a Navy veteran, worked in the Pentagon for a few years. I went to MIT, actually, undergrad, then went to Navy in the Pentagon. Worked there for 3 years during the day, but at nighttime went to law school at George Washington University. And when I was done with those 3 years, I went and saw Gerald Ford, name that some people might remember. And Jerry was our congressman at the time, and I said, what would you do if you were me? He said, well, I would go back, Randy, to the prosecutor's office. And he was a good guy. And he wrote a letter to Jim Miller, who was the prosecutor at the time. And in fact, I got a job as an assistant prosecutor, which I enjoyed. Great time. Juvenile court caused me some consternation, however. They were not handling delinquency very helpfully at the time. They were, believe it or not, kids would be put on probation without any real consequence. And if they went to school and started doing good things, they'd get paid by the court for behaving good. And so if you didn't break the law but were a good kid, you had to do that for free. And so I tried to persuade the court to make some changes, and they didn't seem to want to do that. So I said, well, I'm going to run against one of the 3 judges that's on the bench here. And surprised everyone, especially me, by getting 55% of the vote. And then I took office, and then I had to go into this court where virtually everyone on the court staff, including the other 2 judges, had campaigned vigorously against us, and to try to make changes. And over time we did, and the crime rate came down. So that was my last venture into political office. I was a judge for 15 years here in Kent County. I had a case that led to me writing another book called Justice for the Unborn. Traveled the country talking on those sorts of themes. Since then, I've run a number of nonprofit organizations and a business. So now I'm running for U.S. Senate.
What made you decide to jump into what is a very crowded Senate race?
Well, actually, at the time, there was only one other guy in it. And his name is Pete Konieczny. I don't know if you've talked with Pete or not, but he's from Roscommon County. And actually, I didn't do it until I had first talked to my friend Pete Hoekstra. And Pete said he wasn't running and that he'd support me. So I went for it. And but the real reason for running is our nation is truly heading to a cliff. I think most Americans get that sense. And again, it's like the frog in the kettle, where again the temperature is rising, and so we don't see these troops coming over our borders. We don't see that, but the threat is huge. Every second, we add another $76,000 to our federal debt. It's now $15.6 trillion, and it continues to climb. Everyone agrees it's going to hit us. All the economists in Washington, we're talking not just conservative, but across the board, the CBO people say we are heading to what they call a drop-dead date. And that's where all the tax receipts simply pay for the interest on the national debt. The more conservative ones say that's likely to come within 10 years. The more liberal ones say, we think interest rates will be down enough that maybe it'll go 30 years. But they both agree, both sides agree. We're moving that way. And that's lights out. We just pay for interest. We don't have money for any national defense or electricity for the White House or anything else. We've got to do something about that. And that's why I'm in this thing. We've got to turn it around, and I think I've got a plan to make it happen.
Let's take a look at that plan quickly here. We'll put it up on the board here. You talk about balancing the federal budgets expeditiously through a reduction in the enormous size of government without raising taxes. Take aggressive action to begin paying off the staggering 15+ trillion deficit now, again through cost cutting, not raising taxes. Deal realistically with astronomically large unfunded entitlement liabilities in Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid, and encourage the nonprofit sector to greatly increase its contribution to human need caused by the federal government's major reductions. And that, of course, is at your website, randyheckman2012.com. So I know this is where you want to jump in. And
Yeah, thanks.
Yeah.
Yeah, Mr. Heckman, a lot of this sounds like some of the other Republican candidates talking about getting closer to balance to reduce deficits and the accumulated debt in a relatively short time. What separates you apart substantively? Is there a plank or two that is Randy Heckman's and yours alone? Or is there another piece of your campaign or you that you think differentiates you from, particularly the front runners? You're Pete Hoekstra, you mentioned already, or maybe Clark Duran or Gary Glenn, or the host of others.
Yeah, again, these are all people I know. I consider them friends. And but as far as what distinguishes me is I've been speaking since I declared, which is last March of 2011, talking about the dependency type programs. The Heritage Foundation recently concluded that 70% of the federal budget goes toward dependency type programs. Agricultural support, some upper level educational sorts of things. But the big area that really concerns me is the area of means tested welfare. There are 71 separate federal programs spread across 13 different departments and agencies that administer close to $1 trillion a year in these means tested welfare. And back in 1962, instead of being 70% of a huge budget, which it is now, it was 30% of a much smaller budget. And that continues to grow. We declared war on poverty in 1964-65. LBJ was building this great society. I'm talking about this. In fact, they did some computations. In fact, somebody from MIT, where I was an undergrad, said, you know what, the reason people are poor is they just don't have enough money. Well, we can take care of that. What would it take? And they computed. They said, $10 billion a year could make it work. And guess what? We're now spending close to $1 trillion a year. And we have more poor in America than ever before, and about the same percentage as when we started. In fact, it's funny that Ronald Reagan in 1988 said a number of years ago, federal government declared war on poverty, and poverty won. And he says, not only does it cost a lot of money, in his day, it was $100 billion a year. Now it's close to $1 trillion. But it also makes people perpetually dependent on government handouts, and it wreaks havoc on the safety net that the poor need the most, which is the family. We say to a woman, we will pay you to have a child out of wedlock. Back in the 60s, it was like 6% of our country. Now it's 40%, 4 out of 10. In Detroit and other areas, it's like 8 out of 10. And that's the recipe for generational poverty. Again, it's not all caused by this welfare system. It doesn't help. Whatever government rewards, just like when I ran for judge, they rewarded illegal activity. And guess what? You got a lot more of it in Kent County. Well, that's what happens. And so you're hurting the very people that we're designed to help. So that's that fourth point that you mentioned, is that we need to move this back to where it belongs, to charities, to churches, to nonprofits, to extended families, to neighbors. Kent County alone, do you know what we spend on food stamps in 1 year? I love to ask this because people say, well, maybe $2 million, maybe $200 million a year. That's just food stamp. That's 10% of the total budget for welfare. And I ask people, what would happen if somehow we would stop that these bridge cards would quit working? How many people will starve to death in Kent County over the next 12 months? Most people say none. I said, well, why not? Because you're not going to let your neighbors starve to death. The church is going to become the church again. That's an opportunity to give. We get a blessing to help the poor. That's our opportunity to mentor people, to move them to mainstay. So you asked Doug the question, how do I to me, I love people. We cannot afford to have the people in the inner city to just be taking. We need their contribution. I believe every human being is created in the image of God and has something to contribute. Many of you know the story of Ben Carson, who he's the gifted hands guy. Raised in the city of Detroit by a single mom. She prayed for him. She helped him. He's now the world's leading pediatric neurosurgeon. How many other Ben Carsons are in the inner city of Grand Rapids and Port Huron and Benton Harbor? We need to empower people. But the welfare system just keeps them on the plantation, and that's cruel. And so that's really my heart, is America only works when everybody sees that they're a participant in this thing. So it's going to take major change. It's more than political. It's going to take heart change.
Is the Senate candidacy the way to go about doing this? Because when I hear you talking, some of it reminds me a little bit of the faith-based initiative of President Bush, or actually happened in President Clinton's administration first. But you're talking about as if culture, what the interaction between culture and government is. Government lag?
Oh,
what
definitely.
happens in the culture?
Oh,
Just
definitely.
say
I mean,
more
in
about
fact,
that.
Chuck Colson, who just passed away recently, just a great man. I mean, that was his point. He says that government is a reflection of culture, and it is. I mean, just think of prohibition. You know, we said, evil rum or whatever they called it. We got to do away with this. The culture didn't want it. It didn't work. So if we all of a sudden would try to change the welfare law in America, we've got half of Americans not paying income tax and yet getting major benefits. I mean, it's not going to work. It's really like the days, I don't know if you guys are familiar with William Wilberforce. You probably are, Doug.
Yep.
I mean, that's 200 years ago. He was a member of Parliament in England. And he had two goals. One was a public policy goal, which was to stop the slave trade in England, which was evil. But it was feeding their economic system in a huge way. And the other was to reform the manners of the people of England. And that, I think that means drinking tea with your pinky up. No, that's not what he meant by manners. He meant change the hearts. He said the problem with England is selfishness. Selfishness among the rich, selfishness among the poor, and in between. And he began to preach that. He was a Christian, follower of Christ, and he wrote a book called Practical Christianity where he talked about heart change as well as political change. And that's what's needed today, Doug. We are at a major crisis in America, and we can't just address it at the public policy. To expect one of us great candidates is going to go to Washington, wave a magic wand over the Capitol building. There you go. It's not going to work that way. It's going to change. Hearts are going to have to change in our country, and that's a function of family and church as well as government.
We're going to take a quick break, and when we come back, more with GOP U.S. Senate candidate Randy Heckman. With U.S. Senate candidate Randy Heckman. You talk about waving that magic wand. Washington seems so polarized right now. And before we went on the air here, you were even saying, it's pretty toxic these days. How do you begin to reach out? Everybody's so set in their ideologies. How do you begin to reach across the aisle and I mean, is compromise a dirty word?
Oh, no. I mean, you definitely have to work with everybody. You got to be open. You got to listen to people. You got to use, we got 2 ears, 1 mouth, as someone had said. We got to use that. But I think it's helpful if we believe that there are operating instructions that actually work. I mean, when you think about America starting 200 plus years ago as this nothing nation, shaking his puny little fist in the face of this powerful England and winning. And then building this incredible country. We've 5% of the world's population. We create more wealth than all the other nations put together. We had a formula that worked. The most quoted, I'm going to be very controversial in this next sentence, but the most quoted book by the framers by far was the Bible. There is a lot of wisdom in the Bible about even government. Even the separation of powers is found in the book of Isaiah. And the fact that the president should be born in this country is found in Deuteronomy 17. For example, just a couple little tidbits there. But I mean, they followed. They said, we believe there is such a thing as a truthful way of setting up a self-governing country. It was Thomas Jefferson who said, God who gave us life gave us liberty. And he said, can the liberties of a nation be secure if we have removed from them the conviction that their liberties are a gift from God? So it really was built. Benjamin Franklin, during the Constitutional Convention, called the people to pray, to ask Almighty God, he said, who is our powerful friend, for help. Well, now we've lost that. But we could look back and find the fact that there are truthful concepts upon which our country was built that work, that are consistent with the way that the universe is wired, that works with self-governing people. And if there are truthful concepts that are outside of you and outside of me to be discovered, then we don't have to kill each other. We just have to work together to discover those or rediscover those. But if every issue is just my opinion versus your opinion, then I'm going to take whatever power I can to put you down. You're going to take whatever power to put me down. You understand? But if we're Americans who want this thing to continue for the sake of our children and our grandchildren, and there are principles of law that can be rediscovered, let's discover them again. Let's put them into practice. And let's get this country growing again. And I really believe there are. That's my book, Truth That Sets America Free. It's basically rediscovering those concepts.
So you're not a party first, people second
Are
guy.
you? No, it's a truth first.
Yeah.
I think most truth is more on the conservative Republican side. I believe that. But they're not exclusive owners of that. Truth doesn't belong to any one party. It's like Lincoln said, during the Civil War, he says, whose side is God on? He says, I just want to be on his side. And that's really the truth. That's really the truth.
You talked about making a controversial statement. You're looking at Social Security. You say perhaps folks should work a little bit longer to get the full benefit. How would you sell that to people?
Well, it's hard because, again, it's like in Wilberforce's day. Everyone says, look, take away his, we do have to balance the budget, but take away his stuff. Don't take away my stuff. And that doesn't work. We all just imagine if every American could say, look, I want this thing to continue, and I'm willing to do whatever it takes. If it means, for me to not get on Social Security for another couple of years, instead of 65, it's 67. Or if there's a means testing in the other direction. The guy's got great wealth. I mean, why does he need Social Security? I'm sorry. There's points at which you've got to make those decisions. And also feel that people born like after 1970 should have some options to privately invest the money rather than have the government squander it, which is really what's happened with the Social Security money.
The Republican Senate primary is in early August.
True.
Explain to me how Randy Heckman becomes either the nominee or becomes influential in who the nominee is. What is the path to convincing enough folks to vote for Randy Heckman? Financially, strategic, strategy, the whole thing.
Sure. Well, and that's the question. But first is to get on the ballot, which is to get the nominating petitions, which I think we're going to make that. And I think some of there's 8 candidates now. I wouldn't be surprised that some will find that a challenge.
Right.
We'll see how that goes. Beyond that, I have this book, and increasingly, we're spreading out as far as where our base is. We've found some great connection to people in churches, very frankly, the evangelical community. One of my jobs was I was an executive pastor, administrative pastor of a church for 6 years, and here in town. And I've had some other evangelical sorts of ministries that we've been associated with. But anyhow, there's an arena that we're going to reach out to. The book that we've come out with, we hope we can get that across and get on different radio programming and communicate at that heart level. And then, at the end of the day, you do what you can. But, Rich and Helen DeVos have endorsed us, for example, and we have other people that have given some major gifts to us. Again, the most anyone could give to a candidate is $2,500 per election. And that's challenging. I mean, you got to find a lot of people. So there has to be momentum built, and as it builds, you start getting people giving, and as the people give, you can communicate your message more widely. So I don't need to win this thing to be an okay human. Okay, I'm doing this because I want to see. I have 12 children, 22 grandchildren, and I've got a stake in the future in this country. I do not want to see it go over the cliff.
Well, if you can get each of the children and grandchildren to...
That's 8,500.
Yeah, really, right there.
Hey, there you go. Come on. I wish they were all in Michigan, but they're just not. So,
you've put some miles on the car, I would imagine.
just 40,000 over the last year.
A lot of time spent on the east side of the state, where maybe
Sure.
you're not, the name isn't as well known.
Right.
And most of your competitors are also from the east side of the state.
True.
How are you managing that? How are you tackling the headwinds as you
Sure.
travel east?
Again, Marcia and I, my wife, we just love people. I mean, we go to these places, and it's so tempting if you're running for something to go with the attitude, I want them to give me something here, But we pray. I'm just going to be blunt with you. We pray as we're in the car, about to get there. We say, God, love these people. And that's what we want to do. You don't get paid to do this. I mean, this is hard. I've worked hard in my life. I went to law school every night of the week while I was working in the Navy. That was hard. But this is the hardest thing we've done. But it's a labor of love. We love this country. 1.3 million people have given their lives so that we can just enjoy this conversation here. And it feels like we're just going to throw that away. And I just can't in good conscience do that. And so we go there to love people, and if they support us or support someone else, we're still friends. Debbie's not my enemy. These other people are not my enemy. We're Americans. We've got to save this thing. We've got to work together to make this thing happen. This has been just an incredible country. And we're really going to lose it. And I just can't sit on the sidelines and let that happen. I think every American is going to have to be involved at some level in working through this crisis.
I'm sensing a little John Boehner here. You get emotional when you talk about this.
It's the download to me back in late 2010 was just enormous. And you need that because political campaign, especially if you're an unknown in the state, I mean, it's very much like this. And when you're in the down spots at 3 in the morning, you think, but if you don't have that passion that's been just put into you, you don't want to keep doing it. But it's there. And Marcia has it too. And so we press on. I wouldn't be surprised if we win, which is crazy. I know it's crazy. But it's okay. It's good crazy. It's like me running for judge at age 27. I mean, I was the youngest judge in the state. And I'd walk into court. It was really funny. I'd put the robe on. I'd walk into court with people that had been seen my predecessors twice my age. And they would do a triple take. They say, do we have the wrong guy up here? What's the deal? But it was fine. It was a great experience. We were able to make some real positive changes and impact a lot of lives. It's been good.
So tell me what happens to new Senator Randy Heckman when he gets to Washington on January 3 and gets sworn in. How do you get 59 other senators to agree with you to overcome the filibuster? Mm-hmm. How do you get 218 in the House and either a re-elected Obama or a newly elected Romney as president? Yeah,
well, again, single-handedly, you just can't. You got to build coalitions. You got to communicate with people. You got to talk. Really, when I got elected as a judge, I had 2 judges who vigorously opposed me. Mm-hmm. You win them over. You love them. Mm-hmm. You work with them. You eventually get them to like you, and you say, look, we're in this thing together. And there's certain specific things. The Obamacare thing, it should be repealed, in my opinion, immediately, and a few other things you need to immediately start doing. But you can't do any of them without getting a lot of cooperation. So it's not just yelling at people, it's drawing people. I once debated the head of Michigan's ACLU in Flint, Michigan at a union hall. I was the token right-wing nutcase, okay? Right. And it started out with hoots and hollers, but by the end we were all friends. I even got Howard Simon, the head of ACLU, he liked me. He agreed with me. I said, we all, believe it or not, are Americans, and we all like our rights. But I like my rights to be industrial strength. And that's where we quoted the Declaration, that God gave us these rights, and therefore they're industrial strength. If they come from the Supreme Court or from the President or from the legislature, they're not industrial strength. And he said, you know what, you're right. So I love working with people that disagree with me, believe it or not. I really do.
And where do you disagree with Representative Hoekstra?
Oh, again, I tell people that he's my friend, but his strength is he's been 18 years in Washington. That's also his weakness. He's been part of the buildup of this debt that's now really menacing. My strength is I haven't been there, and that's also my weakness. I think we need a fresh set of legs to go in there and be able to make change. And that's where we disagree. We may disagree on some individual policies, but I think at the end of the day, I think we would typically vote almost virtually the same. We need more than somebody to go there and vote a certain way. We need somebody that has leadership ability, the ability to communicate and persuade and motivate not only the people in Washington, but really to use a bully pulpit to speak to broader numbers of people in the country and say, look, we are Americans. These are principles that worked. Let's go back to those. And so tall order, huge. But our alternative is to do nothing. And I can't do nothing. I can't. And so we press on.
we're close to the last minute here, but you talk about economic strength. What would you do to strengthen this economy?
Well, again, we've got to cut debt. I mean, we've got to cut expenditures, and I've expressed that. To me, the dependency thing has to come down. It's got to go back to where we can really help people. But beyond that, it strikes me that we got to get the economy going. If you wanted to kill an economy, it'd be hard to do better than what we've done. And the number one problem are regulations. Regulations are just killing our economy. I mean, I could just give you, I've talked to many CEOs, and that's a big area. The tax system, I'm for the fair tax, and other ways that make it just easier to happen. So there's a lot of things to be done, and they can go to my website and see some of those.
All right, very good. We will end the discussion there. I'd like to thank Doug Koppen, Calvin College, Professor of Political Science, Dave Murray, MLive Media Group, and our guest, Randy Heckman, candidate for U.S. Senate. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
And thank you for joining us this week. We'll see you next week on West Michigan Week.